$500 a week. That's what it costs for a dirty black boy like you to breathe on my sidewalk. Officer Craig Dawson snatched a rib straight off Byron Vance's grill, bit into it, and spit the bone onto the cart.
I'm tired of hearing about your kind and your nasty little grills. I'm gonna drag this whole cart to the curb myself.
Byron wiped his hands slow.
500 every week. For what exactly?
Dawson got in his face.
Aiba, I could put you down just like a dog, Byron. And I know where your mother lives.
Byron nodded.
Got it, officer.
But Dawson had no idea who he was really talking to. And by the time he found out, it was already too late. Let me rewind. 2 months before that sidewalk showdown, Fulton Avenue looked like any other working-class block in a mid-Atlantic American city. Barbershops with faded awnings, a laundromat that had been there since the 80s, a corner store where everybody knew the owner by first name, and stretched along the curb, food carts, taco stands, flower tables, a woman selling homemade lemonade out of a cooler. This was a block that survived on hustle, on people waking up before the sun to make an honest living with their hands. That's where Byron Vance showed up. He rolled in on a Tuesday morning in a used pickup truck with a steel smoker strapped to the bed. Took him about 2 hours to set everything up. The cart, the hand-painted sign that read Byron's Southern Smoke, the small portable speaker playing old Motown. He moved like a man who had done this 1,000 times. Calm, methodical, no wasted motion. And here's the detail that matters. Before Byron lit a single piece of charcoal, he taped 3 documents inside the front window of his cart. City vendor license, health department certificate, fire marshal sign-off. All current, all legit. Every piece of paper you could possibly need, right there in plain sight for anyone who wanted to look. Remember that. Remember the paperwork. It's going to matter later. The food was good. No, the food was ridiculous. Slow smoked ribs with a dry rub that had people closing their eyes on the first bite. Pulled pork sandwiches on brioche buns. Collard greens that tasted like somebody's grandmother made them. Within a week, Byron's line stretched past the flower stand, past the laundromat, almost to the corner. Within 2 weeks, people were driving across town just to eat lunch on Fulton Avenue. But it wasn't just the food, it was Byron himself. He remembered names, he remembered orders. The old woman on the second floor who couldn't walk down, he'd pack a plate and leave it with the corner store owner to bring up. Kids who came by after school got free samples and a stay out of trouble that somehow didn't sound like a lecture. He called every woman over 50 ma'am, and meant it every time. Byron had this habit, though. He kept checking his watch. This thick, slightly oversized digital watch on his left wrist. He'd glance at it between orders, sometimes mid-conversation, sometimes while he was alone cleaning the grill. Not like he was in a hurry, more like he was keeping track of something. Nobody thought twice about it. A busy man checking the time. What's strange about that? Keep that watch in mind, too. 2 spots down from Byron's cart, there was a woman named Renee Holloway, 60 years old. Sold flowers from a folding table she carried from her apartment 6 blocks away every single morning. Roses, carnations, whatever was in season. She and Byron became friends fast, the way people do when they share a sidewalk 10 hours a day. She'd bring him sweet tea in the afternoon. He'd save her a plate every evening. They talked about everything and nothing. Music, weather, the block. But one afternoon, while they were packing up, Renee said something that stuck. She looked down the avenue at the empty spots where other carts used to be and said, "Used to be more of us out here. They left. Wasn't by choice." Byron asked what she meant. Renee shook her head and changed the subject. Then there was the patrol car. First week it drove past Byron's cart 3 times. Slow. Real slow. The kind of slow that's not about traffic. It's about being seen. The officer inside didn't wave, didn't stop. Just looked at the cart, looked at Byron, then drove on. 3 times in 5 days, Byron noticed. Of course he noticed, but he didn't say anything, just kept cooking, kept smiling, kept checking that watch. And then there was Tomas Rivera, taco cart 2 spots up. Young guy, maybe 28, born and raised in El Paso. One evening, while they were both breaking down their setups, Tomas leaned over and said real quiet, "That cop, Dawson, he collects. You understand what I mean?" Byron said he didn't. Tomas looked at the ground. "You will." Week 3, Friday. The lunch rush had just died down and Byron was scraping the grill when a patrol car pulled up. Not driving past this time. Parked. Engine off. The door swung open and out stepped Officer Craig Dawson. 14 years on the force. 42 years old. Built like a man who used to be in shape and still thought he was. Dawson didn't get in line. Didn't wait. He walked straight past 6 paying customers, put both hands on Byron's counter, and leaned in like he owned the steel under his palms. "Smells good out here. Real good." He looked around at the customers, then back at Byron. "Lot of people. Lot of cash. Business must be booming, huh?" Byron set down his spatula. "Can't complain. You want a plate, officer?" Dawson didn't answer the question. He picked up a rib from the sample tray. Didn't ask, just took it. Bit into it slow, chewed like he was grating it, then tossed the bone back onto the tray. Right on top of the other samples. "Not bad." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "So here's the thing. You got your little license up there, I see that. Good for you. But a license is a piece of paper, and paper doesn't mean much on this block. What means something on this block is me." He let that sit. The customers in line went quiet. A woman near the back pulled her kid a little closer. "There's a community support fee for operating out here. $500 a week. Cash. Every Friday. Think of it as rent." Byron didn't move. $500 a week. I clear maybe $800 on a good week, officer." Dawson shrugged. "Then I guess you better have more good weeks." He smiled, the kind of smile that's really a warning. "You pay and everything runs smooth. Your customers don't get ID checks. Your cart doesn't get cited. Nobody knocks your setup over during a crowd control sweep. Everybody's happy." "And if I don't pay?" Dawson tilted his head. "You're a smart guy, Byron. I'm sure you can figure that out." He said Byron's name. Not sir, not buddy, Byron. Like he'd already looked him up. Like he'd already decided what Byron was worth. Byron glanced at his watch. Quick, casual, like checking the time between orders, and said, "Let me think on it." That threw Dawson off. Most vendors either caved on the spot or pushed back hard enough for him to make an example. Byron did neither. Just stood there, calm as still water, and asked for time. Dawson studied him for a second, then shrugged. "Sure, think on it, but don't think too long." He turned to leave, and then, right before he got to the cruiser, he stopped, turned around, raised his voice just enough for the whole line to hear. "Nice little operation you got, Byron. Be a shame if the health department found something. You know how it is. Y'all don't always keep things up to code." "Y'all," he said it looking right at Byron's face. Then he looked at the black teenager standing third in line, then at the black woman behind her. "Y'all." Everybody knew exactly who he meant. The white woman at the front of the line stared at her shoes. Nobody said a word. Dawson got in his car and drove off. That night, Byron sat with Renee after they both closed up. She was quiet for a long time. Then she told him everything. Dawson had been running this game for years. Not months. Years. He had a system. He targeted vendors of color. Black, Latino, anyone who looked like they couldn't fight back. The ones who paid, he left alone. The ones who didn't, they got buried. Bogus health citations, parking violations for carts that didn't have engines, fire code complaints on setups that had already been approved. And if all that didn't work, he'd have the cart impounded, towed away while the vendor was in the bathroom or grabbing lunch. By the time they got through the paperwork to get it back, they were broke. 3 vendors left Fulton Avenue last year alone. A woman who sold Jamaican patties, a man who sharpened knives, a couple who ran a flower cart on the North End. All of them vendors of color. All of them gone. "I reported him once," Renee said. She wasn't angry when she said it. That was the worst part. She was past anger. She was tired. 2 years ago, went down to the precinct, filled out the complaint form, wrote everything down, dates, amounts, what he said to me. You know what happened?
Byron waited.
Nothing. Not a thing. Nobody called me. Nobody followed up. And then, the next week, my cart got towed. 9 years I'd been in that same spot. 9 years, never a single problem. One complaint about Dawson, and suddenly I'm obstructing pedestrian flow. She took a sip of her tea. Her hand was steady. That steadiness, that was the thing that broke your heart, because it meant she'd had years to get used to this, years to stop shaking, years to turn rage into resignation.
How much do you pay him?
Byron asked. $200 a month, from the flower money. She paused. Some months that's almost everything. Byron said nothing for a while, then, and nobody else has reported him? Renee almost laughed. Baby, who's gonna report him? To who? His sergeant? She signs off on every citation he writes. The hotline? 2 people called that. Anonymous tips. Nothing happened. Nothing ever happens. The next night, Byron caught Tomas closing up his cart. He asked him straight, "How much does Dawson take from you?" Tomas didn't look up. $300 a week. A week? For how long? Over a year. Byron did the math in his head. That was more than $15,000. From one vendor. For doing absolutely nothing except existing on a public sidewalk. You ever think about going to the press? Byron asked. Tomas finally looked at him, and the expression on his face, it wasn't fear exactly, it was something worse. It was the look of a man who had already calculated every option and crossed them all off. He told me he'd call ICE, said he could have a van here in 20 minutes. Tomas's voice was flat. I was born in El Paso, man. I'm a citizen. My parents are citizens. But he knows it doesn't matter. He knows the threat is enough. That's how it works. Dawson didn't need the law to be on his side. He just needed people to believe it was. The following Friday, Dawson came back. No smile this time. He walked up to the cart, leaned on it like it was his kitchen counter and said, "So, you think about what we discussed?" Byron reached under the cart, pulled out a white envelope, handed it over. Dawson opened it right there on the sidewalk, counted the bills, $500 in 20s, slowly, deliberately, licking his thumb between each one. Then he folded the cash, slid it into his vest pocket, and patted the cart twice, like patting a dog that finally learned to sit. Smart man, see? That wasn't hard. He walked away. Byron watched him go. Then he looked down at his watch. The tiny red dot on the side, so small you'd miss it if you weren't looking, was pulsing. 4 Fridays passed. 4 envelopes. 4 collections. And each time Dawson stayed a little longer, talked a little louder, got a little meaner. Week 4. You should be grateful, Byron. Most guys like you would be lucky to have this corner. Week 5. Turn that jungle noise down. This is a business district, not a block party. Week 6. Your people sure love standing in line, huh? Must be genetic. Each comment was surgical, quiet enough that a bystander might not catch the full weight, loud enough that Byron and every black customer within earshot felt it in their chest. 4 weeks, $2,000, and every single cent of it documented. Week 7, Dawson showed up with backup. A second officer, younger, unnamed, stood by the cruiser with his arms crossed while Dawson collected. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The message was simple. I've got people behind me. You've got nobody. Byron handed over the envelope. Dawson counted it, walked away. And that was supposed to be that. But it wasn't. Because what Dawson saw as submission was something else entirely. Every calm nod, every yes, sir, every envelope. It was all building toward something Dawson couldn't see, something he'd never see coming. Let me pull back for a second and show you what Dawson's operation actually did to Fulton Avenue. Not just to Byron, to the whole block. In 3 years, 11 vendors of color disappeared from that street. 11. A Jamaican patty stand that had been there since 2016. A Salvadoran pupusa cart that a mother and daughter ran 6 days a week. A man who sold handmade jewelry and had never missed a single day in 4 years. All gone. Not because they failed, not because the food was bad or the customers stopped coming, because one man with a badge decided they owed him money for the privilege of existing, and when they couldn't pay, he erased them. And here's the thing that should make you sick. The vendors who never got asked to pay, the ones Dawson never touched, they were all white, every single one. Same block, same permits, same sidewalk. But Dawson walked right past them every Friday like they were invisible. The pattern wasn't hidden, it was obvious. It was sitting right there in the open, and nobody with the power to stop it cared enough to look. One night, after the block went quiet and the last customer left, Byron sat alone in his apartment. The framed photo from his cart, the one he kept tucked by the register, the one he sometimes touched between orders without even realizing it, was sitting on the kitchen table in front of him. A younger man, same build, same jaw, same eyes, wearing an apron just like Byron's. Byron picked up his phone and dialed. Colleen. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath, something he'd been holding down for weeks. I need to know we have enough, because I'm watching this man do to these people exactly what was done to... He stopped, took a breath, started again. I need to know it's going to be worth it. The voice on the other end said something we can't hear. Byron nodded, hung up, and sat there in the dark for a long time, staring at that photograph. Remember that name, Colleen, and remember this phone call, because nothing about it was what it seemed. The next Friday, week 8, Dawson showed up with news. He was leaning against Byron's cart before Byron even saw the cruiser pull up. Price went up. Byron looked at him. What? $7.50 a week, starting today. $7.50? That's almost everything I make. Dawson picked at his teeth. Then maybe this ain't the corner for you. There's other spots, worse spots, rougher neighborhoods. Might be more your speed anyway. He let that hang. Your choice. The threat wasn't even disguised anymore. Pay more or disappear, just like the 11 before him. That same week, Renee told Byron she was shutting down her flower stand at the end of the month. She said it the same way you'd say you're switching laundry detergent. Flat, final, like the decision had been made a long time ago and she was just now saying it out loud. Can't do both anymore, she said. Can't pay him and pay for my medication, so I'm choosing my medication. She folded a tablecloth and set it in her cart. 22 years I've been on this block, Byron, before Dawson, before his precinct even existed in this district. But you can't fight a uniform, baby. You just can't. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. And that calm, that practiced, exhausted 22 years of this calm was worse than any scream. After she left, Byron stood at his cart alone. The block was empty. The streetlights were buzzing. He looked at the photo inside his cart, that younger man in the apron, and said something under his breath, almost to himself, almost to the photo. I keep real good records, Renee, real good records. If you heard that and thought it was a vendor talking about his bookkeeping, that's exactly what you were supposed to think. Here's what the system looked like from the inside. Renee Holloway's complaint, the one she filed 2 years ago at the precinct, was marked resolved in the system. No follow-up interview, no investigation, no contact with Renee. Just a stamp and a closed file. 2 anonymous tips to the precinct's integrity hotline, logged, never assigned, never investigated. And every single one of Dawson's retaliatory vendor citations? Signed off by the same person, Sergeant Thelma Briggs. His direct supervisor. No questions asked. No patterns flagged. No review. The system didn't break. That's what people need to understand. The system didn't fail because something went wrong. The system failed because it was doing exactly what certain people built it to do. Protect its own and ignore everyone else. But what Dawson and Briggs didn't know was that somebody outside the system had been watching. And that somebody had just decided he had enough. Friday, week 10. collection day. But something was different. If you were standing on Fulton Avenue that morning, you might not have been able to name it, but you would have felt it. The air was tighter. The block was quieter. Byron's cart was set up in its usual spot, the sign still reading, Byron's Southern Smoke, the apron still tied around his waist. But the grill was cold. The speaker was off. No Motown. No smoke curling into the sky. No line of customers stretching down the sidewalk. Byron stood behind the cart with his hands flat on the counter, still, patient, like a man who had been waiting for this exact morning for a very long time. Half a block east, a white van with tinted windows sat parked along the curb. It had been there since 6 a.m. Nobody paid attention to it. Just another delivery vehicle on a busy street. Except there was no logo on the side, and it hadn't moved in 4 hours. Across the street, a woman sat in a parked sedan. Brown hair, sunglasses, a newspaper open on her steering wheel. She hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. At 11:47 a.m., a patrol car turned onto Fulton Avenue and slowed to a stop in front of Byron's cart. Same car, same spot, same routine. The door opened, and Officer Craig Dawson stepped out. He adjusted his sunglasses, hitched his belt, took his time walking over, that slow, wide-legged stroll he always did, the one designed to remind everyone on the sidewalk that he was in no rush because nobody could rush him. He didn't notice the van, didn't notice the sedan, didn't notice that Byron's apron was clean, no grease stains, no smoke marks, fresh, like it had never touched a grill. "Quiet day," Dawson said, leaning on the cart. "Where's your fan club?" "Gave them the day off." Dawson chuckled. He didn't find it funny. Laughing was just something he did before he collected. A ritual. A warm-up. He extended his hand, palm up, fingers curling inward. The gesture. The one Byron had seen every Friday for 2 months. Pay up. Byron reached into his apron. Dawson watched, relaxed. He was already thinking about what he'd spend it on. Maybe he was thinking about lunch. Maybe he was thinking about the boat payment he'd been making with vendor money for the last 18 months. Whatever he was thinking, it wasn't about the thing that was actually happening. Because Byron didn't pull out an envelope. He pulled out a black leather credential case, held it at chest height, and flipped it open. Gold badge on the left, photo ID on the right, 3 letters across the top, big, bold, impossible to misread, FBI. Below the badge, Special Agent Byron Vance, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption Unit. Time stopped. Or at least it felt like it did. Dawson's face went through a transformation that lasted maybe 4 seconds, but carried the weight of his entire career collapsing in on itself. Confusion, because the badge didn't make sense. Recognition, because suddenly it made perfect sense. Denial, because if it was real, then everything he'd done for the past 2 months was recorded. And then terror, white-hot, bone-deep terror, because it was real. His hand, the one still extended for the envelope, dropped to his side like it had been cut from a string. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Byron spoke first, calm, measured, the same voice he'd used to say, "Got it, officer," 10 weeks ago, except now it carried the full weight of federal authority behind it. "Officer Craig Dawson, badge number 4452. I'm Special Agent Byron Vance, FBI Public Corruption Unit. You are under arrest for extortion, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and conspiracy." He paused. Just long enough. "You have the right to remain silent. I'd recommend you use it." The van doors opened. 4 agents in navy blue windbreakers, FBI in yellow block letters across the back, stepped onto the sidewalk. The woman in the sedan, Agent Colleen Ashford, the voice on the other end of Byron's late-night phone call, got out, put her sunglasses on top of her head, and walked toward the cart from the opposite direction. Dawson was boxed in. He looked left. Agents. Looked right. Ashford. Looked at Byron, the man he'd been calling boy for 10 weeks, the man he'd spit rib bones at, The man he'd threatened and extorted and humiliated every Friday like clockwork. And for the first time in maybe his entire life, Craig Dawson had absolutely nothing to say. His hand moved toward his radio on instinct. Byron shook his head. "I wouldn't." Dawson's hand stopped. "Officer Dawson." Ashford's voice was crisp, professional, and carried zero sympathy. "Place your hands on the vehicle." He did. His legs were shaking. You could see it through his uniform pants. A tremor running from his knees to his boots. The man who had strutted across this sidewalk every Friday like he owned it could barely stand. Ashford cuffed him. Byron watched, arms folded, badge still hanging from his belt. The apron was off now. He didn't need it anymore. 6 weeks ago, Craig Dawson stood on this exact patch of concrete and told Byron Vance that he needed to pay $500 a week for the right to exist. Now, Byron Vance was watching Craig Dawson get handcuffed with pre-marked bills still sitting in his locker at the precinct. Funny how that works. As agents walked him toward the van, Dawson turned his head, looked at Byron over his shoulder. Really looked at him. Maybe for the first time. Not at a vendor, not at a target, at the man who had just ended his career. "This was a setup?" His voice cracked. "The whole time?" Byron didn't blink. "No, officer, this was an investigation. There's a difference. A setup means I made you do something you wouldn't normally do. I didn't make you do anything. I just showed up, and you did the rest yourself." They put Dawson in the van. The doors closed. And half a block away, standing next to her folding table full of roses and carnations, Renee Holloway watched. She saw the FBI jackets. She saw the handcuffs. She saw the man who had stolen from her for years folded into the back of a federal vehicle like luggage. She put one hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Within 48 hours of Dawson's arrest, the case moved from the sidewalk to a place with fluorescent lights and no windows, the regional FBI field office 30 miles from Fulton Avenue. Agent Colleen Ashford stood in front of a whiteboard covered in photos, timelines, and red lines connecting names to dates to dollar amounts. 6 agents sat around the table. Byron stood in the back, arms crossed, still wearing the same watch. Ashford laid it out. Dawson wasn't a solo act. He was the visible piece of something uglier, a pattern of civil rights violations that local authorities had either ignored or actively buried for years. The FBI had been aware of the pattern for 10 months before Byron ever lit a grill. Tips had come in from community organizations, civil rights attorneys, and 2 former officers who had left the precinct rather than participate. The Bureau opened a formal investigation, codenamed Operation Fulton, and decided the only way to build an airtight case was to put an agent on the ground, in plain sight, and let Dawson come to him. That agent was Byron Vance. Byron wasn't the first person to notice Craig Dawson, Ashford told her team. He was the first person with the authority to do something about it. Now let me walk you through what Byron built over those 10 weeks, because this is where the case went from a street-level shakedown to a federal prosecution. First, the audio. Byron's wristwatch wasn't a watch. It was a concealed recording device approved by a federal magistrate under Title III, a wiretap order. Every conversation between Byron and Dawson, from the first community support fee to the last collection, was captured in broadcast-quality digital audio. 8 separate recordings, time-stamped, geotagged, backed up to a secure FBI server every night. Every racial slur, every threat, every dollar amount, all of it. Second, the video. The watch wasn't the only device. Byron's apron had a button camera sewn into the chest, a second recording angle that the outline never mentioned until now, because Byron never mentioned it either. It captured Dawson's face during every interaction, his hand reaching for the envelope, his fingers counting the bills, his expression when he made the comments about jungle noise and your people. This wasn't a case built on he said, she said. This was a case built on Dawson's own face saying it all. Third, the money. Every dollar Byron handed to Dawson came from the FBI, pre-marked bills, serial numbers logged before each Friday exchange. When agents searched Dawson's locker at the precinct the morning of the arrest, they found $3,200 in marked bills, some still inside the white envelopes Byron had used. Dawson hadn't even bothered to move them. That's how safe he felt. That's how untouchable he believed he was. Fourth, the victims. While Byron held his cover on Fulton Avenue, Agent Ashford had been working the other end. Over the course of 3 months, she contacted 8 former vendors, people who had left the block because of Dawson. She met them in coffee shops, in church basements, in living rooms. One by one, they gave sworn statements. Names, dates, amounts, exact words Dawson had used. Renee Holloway was among them. So was Tomas Rivera. So were 6 others who had never met each other but told the same story with the same details. Because the truth doesn't need coordination. Fifth, the finances. The FBI subpoenaed Dawson's bank records. What they found was a mess he couldn't explain. Over the past 3 years, Dawson had made cash deposits totaling more than $82,000, on top of his salary. No second job, no inheritance, no investments, just cash, deposited in irregular amounts at irregular intervals, almost always within 48 hours of a Friday. His attorney would later try to argue that the deposits were from poker winnings. The FBI's forensic accountant responded with a single sentence. Officer Dawson would have to be the most prolific poker player in the history of the Mid-Atlantic region. The evidence wasn't strong, it was overwhelming. It was the kind of case federal prosecutors dream about, the kind where every piece supports every other piece, and the defendant's only real option is to decide how much of his life he wants to lose. But the investigation didn't stop at Dawson. Agent Ashford pulled the supervisory records of Sergeant Thelma Briggs, Dawson's direct superior. What she found was a paper trail of institutional failure so consistent it stopped looking like negligence and started looking like policy. Every complaint filed against Dawson crossed Briggs's desk. Every single one. Renee's, the 2 anonymous hotline tips, a written letter from a former vendor's attorney. All of them were closed within 48 hours. No interviews, no body camera reviews. No follow-up of any kind, just a stamp, resolved, and Briggs's signature at the bottom. Briggs didn't pull the trigger, Ashford told her team, but she handed him the gun every single time. That's not negligence, that's facilitation. Briggs was placed on administrative leave pending a federal civil rights investigation. Her access to department systems was revoked the same afternoon. 3 days after the arrest, Dawson sat in a federal interrogation room. No sunglasses, no gun belt, no smirk. Just a gray sweatshirt, a plastic chair, and a union attorney next to him who looked like he already knew how this was going to end. Across the table sat Byron Vance, suit, tie, badge on his belt, a binder in front of him thick enough to prop open a door. Dawson spoke first. He was trying for defiance, but it came out thin. "This is entrapment. You came to my beat. You set me up." Byron opened the binder, didn't look up. Entrapment is when law enforcement induces someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit. Officer Dawson, you were extorting vendors for over 2 years before I set foot on Fulton Avenue. He looked up now. I didn't induce anything. I just let you be yourself. Dawson's attorney whispered something. Dawson ignored him. You were pretending. The whole time. The grill, the food, The ribs were real, Byron said. My grandmother's recipe. Everything else? Yes. That was the investigation. Byron opened his laptop and pressed play. Dawson's own voice filled the room. Think of it as rent. Everybody pays rent. Click. Next clip. You want ice down here? Because I can make a call. Click. Turn that jungle noise down. Click. Y'all don't always keep things up to code. Each recording was time-stamped. Each one had a corresponding video from the button camera. Dawson's face, clear as a photograph, saying every word. His attorney closed his eyes. Dawson stared at the table. The silence between clips was heavier than the words themselves. There's something about hearing your own cruelty played back to you in a room where it's going to become part of the public record. Something that strips away every excuse, every justification, every story you've told yourself about why what you did wasn't that bad. It's just your voice, your words, your face, and there's nowhere to hide. Byron closed the laptop and opened a different section of the binder. Victim statements. He read from Renee Holloway's sworn testimony, not the whole thing, but enough. How she started her flower stand after her husband passed. How it gave her a reason to get up in the morning. How Dawson's payments forced her to choose between her stand and her blood pressure medication. How she filed a complaint and got punished for it. How she eventually stopped believing anyone would ever listen. Her words, summarized in that room, carried the weight of 22 years on a sidewalk and 2 decades of being invisible to the people who were supposed to protect her. I didn't want him fired, Renee had written. I just wanted him to stop. I just wanted to sell my flowers in peace. Byron turned the page. Tomas Rivera's statement. The ICE threat made to a man born in El Paso, Texas, a U.S. citizen, whose family had been American longer than Dawson's. Tomas had paid over $15,000 across his time on Fulton Avenue. $15,000 that was supposed to go into a savings account for his daughter's college tuition. His daughter, who was now attending community college instead of the state university she'd been accepted to, because the money wasn't there anymore. Dawson took it, every dollar, and he took it knowing that a man too afraid of a fake ICE threat would never fight back. Byron closed the binder. He didn't say anything for a long time. He didn't need to. The room was doing the talking now. The room and everything in it. The recordings, the statements, the binder full of dates and dollars and damage. Dawson's attorney finally broke the silence. We'd like to discuss terms. Byron stood up. That's between your client and the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'm done here. He walked out. But the case wasn't done growing. In the weeks that followed, the FBI flagged similar extortion patterns in 2 neighboring precincts. Different officers, same playbook, same targets, vendors of color, immigrants, anyone operating in public space without the protection of money or connections. Operation Fulton expanded. Subpoenas went out. More bank records were pulled. More victims came forward. One corrupt officer is a story. A pattern of corrupt officers across multiple precincts is a system, and systems don't change because of a single arrest. But they don't change without one either. That night after the interrogation, Byron sat alone in the break room of the FBI field office, vending machine humming, coffee going cold in his hand. He took out his phone and looked at a photo, the same one from the cart. The younger man in the apron, same smile, same eyes. His brother, Derek Vance. 8 years ago, Derek ran a food cart in another city. Different block, different state, same story. A patrol officer decided Derek's cart was a problem, harassed him, cited him, came back week after week until Derek pushed back, and when he did, the officer threw him to the ground during a wrongful seizure. Derek hit the pavement spine first. The injury never healed right. He spent 4 years in and out of hospitals, losing mobility, losing weight, losing the version of himself that used to stand behind a grill and feed a neighborhood. He died at 31 from complications. The officer was never disciplined, never investigated, never even named in a report. Byron looked at the photo for a long time. Then he said, quiet enough that nobody else in the building could have heard it, I told you I'd finish it, D. I told you. Every week Byron stood behind that grill on Fulton Avenue, he was standing in Derek's place. Every insult he absorbed, every boy, every envelope he handed over with steady hands, he absorbed it for the brother who couldn't fight back anymore. His calm wasn't just FBI training, it was love. The kind of love that turns grief into a mission and a mission into a promise. and he kept that promise. 3 weeks after the interrogation, a federal grand jury handed down the indictment, 12 counts, the kind of number that ends careers and starts prison sentences. 8 counts of extortion under color of authority. Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 1951, each one carrying up to 20 years. 3 counts of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, Section 242, up to 10 years each. And 1 count of conspiracy for the system he built, the pattern he maintained, and the people he recruited to look the other way while he did it. 12 counts, 20-plus potential years behind bars, all because Craig Dawson looked at a man in an apron and decided he was nothing. The booking photo hit the local news that evening. No sunglasses, no smirk, no uniform. Just a man in a gray t-shirt staring into a camera with the expression of someone who just realized that the life he built was built on a foundation that someone else had just pulled out from under him. But the indictment didn't stop with Dawson. Sergeant Thelma Briggs, the woman who signed off on every retaliatory citation, who stamped "resolved" on every complaint without making a single phone call, was charged separately. Obstruction of justice, failure to report known criminal activity by a subordinate officer. She was terminated from the force the same day. Her pension, 14 years of contributions, was frozen pending the outcome of her trial. Accountability doesn't just mean catching the person who pulled the trigger. It means catching the person who looked the other way and pretended they didn't hear the shot. Dawson's attorney tried to fight. Of course he did. He filed motions to suppress the recordings. Denied. Motions to dismiss on entrapment grounds. Denied. A motion arguing that the pre-marked bills were planted. Denied so fast the judge didn't even leave the bench. Every legal door Dawson's team tried to open had Byron Vance standing on the other side with a binder full of evidence and 8 weeks of footage. 6 weeks after the indictment, facing the full weight of a federal case he couldn't win, Dawson folded. His attorney negotiated a plea. Guilty on 4 counts of extortion. Guilty on 1 count of civil rights violation. The remaining counts were dropped as part of the agreement. Sentencing recommendation: 12 to 15 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole for the first 8. Dawson's attorney released a statement to the press. 1 sentence. My client accepts responsibility for his actions. Accepts responsibility. That's a nice way to put it. Here's another way. A man who spent 3 years robbing working people at the point of a badge finally ran out of people who would let him get away with it. As part of the plea agreement, Dawson was ordered to pay $126,000 in restitution to his victims. That number, calculated from bank records, vendor statements, and FBI financial analysis, represented the total amount he had extracted from minority vendors on Fulton Avenue across 3 years. It wouldn't undo the damage, wouldn't bring back the businesses that closed, wouldn't give Tomas's daughter the university tuition that disappeared into Dawson's pocket. But it was an acknowledgement, in writing, in law, on the record, that what he took didn't belong to him. The city council, under pressure from the publicity surrounding the case, announced 3 reforms within 60 days of the sentencing. First, an independent civilian oversight board for all police interactions involving street vendors and small business operators. No more complaints disappearing into the precinct that generated them. Second, mandatory body camera activation for every officer-initiated contact with a vendor. No exceptions. No technical malfunctions. The camera goes on before the conversation starts, or the conversation doesn't happen. Third, a dedicated complaint hotline for vendor harassment, routed to an outside agency with no connection to local precincts. The kind of hotline that Renee Holloway needed 2 years ago and didn't have. 3 reforms. Not perfect, not enough, but 3 more than existed before Byron Vance set up a smoker on Fulton Avenue. The last image of Craig Dawson that anyone on Fulton Avenue would ever see was this. A man in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him, head down, being walked from the courthouse to a transport van. He passed the same sidewalk where he used to collect envelopes, the same corner where he once told a black man that breathing on his block cost $500 a week. He didn't look up. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked. And 2 blocks away on that same stretch of Fulton Avenue, Renee Holloway unfolded her table, set out her buckets, and arranged a fresh batch of roses in the afternoon sun. Byron was there. He helped her carry the heavy ones. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. The flowers were back. That was enough. Byron Vance didn't stay on Fulton Avenue. Within a month of the sentencing, he was reassigned. Different city, different block, different name on the cart. The details are classified. They have to be. But the pattern is the same. He goes where corruption feeds on the vulnerable. He becomes one of them. He cooks, he cleans, he smiles. He absorbs whatever they throw at him. And when he has enough, he opens the binder and lets the system do what the system should have been doing all along. Byron Vance doesn't look like a federal agent. That's the whole point. He looks like the people the system forgets, because he refuses to let them be forgotten. Now, this story is fiction. I need to say that clearly. Byron Vance is not a real person. Fulton Avenue is not a real street. Craig Dawson is not a real officer. But the pattern is real. In cities across America, documented by the Department of Justice, reported by investigative journalists, confirmed in federal court, police officers have extorted street vendors. They've demanded cash for protection. They've filed retaliatory citations against vendors who refuse to pay. They've targeted vendors of color at rates that can't be explained by anything other than what they are. This isn't speculation. It's in the court records. It's in the DOJ reports. It's in the exposed complaint files that sat in precinct drawers for years without anyone opening them. The story I told you today is fiction, but there are real Renees out there. Real women who had to choose between their livelihood and their medication because a man with a badge decided their sidewalk belonged to him. There are real Tomases, citizens born on American soil who were threatened with deportation by officers who knew the threat was a lie but used it anyway because fear is cheaper than force. And there are real Derricks, people who pushed back and paid for it with their bodies, their health, their lives, and whose names never made it into a single report. Byron carries his brother's photo everywhere he goes, not because he needs to remember Derrick. He could never forget him. He carries it because it reminds him why he does this. Not for promotions, not for commendations, for the people who never got the chance to see the system correct itself. Some people fight because they want to win. Byron fights because someone he loved didn't get the chance to. The last voice in this story isn't Byron's. It's Renee's. She's back at her flower stand. Same spot, same folding table, same roses. A customer asks if she's happy to be back. She stops, thinks about it, really thinks. Happy? I don't know about happy, but I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Not again. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really sit with it before you answer. If you saw someone being shaken down, someone just trying to earn an honest living on a public sidewalk, would you speak up? Would you record it? Would you report it? Or would you look at the ground and keep walking, the way those customers did on Fulton Avenue? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear it. And if this story hit you, if it made you angry, if it made you think, if it reminded you of something you've seen or something you've lived, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Because these stories deserve to be told. And the people in them, the real ones, the ones still out there on sidewalks and street corners trying to make a living while the system looks the other way, they deserve to be heard. Fulton Avenue is quiet now. Byron's cart is gone. He's somewhere else, doing it again, feeding people and taking notes. But the block is alive. New vendors, new carts, new music, kids laughing after school, the smell of something good drifting down the sidewalk. And at the end of the block, right where she's always been, Renee's flowers are catching the afternoon sun.